Good morning. Please turn with me to Ezekiel, the 46th chapter, as we look at the topic, the reason. Usually a kind of hokey rhyme during this time of year. It goes, do you remember the reason for the season? And actually I'm going to talk about the more hokey construction of that term, because now we're not going to talk about it just flat out being Jesus, but we're going to gather during Thanksgiving. God willing, if you got somewhere to go. If not, we're going to talk about just the ability to appreciate having some downtime and some rest, even if it's just me time. But we're also going to talk about whether you're alone or with others. What are some of the reasons why, on just the upside, God willing, you will be able to enjoy this holiday season. Not just Thanksgiving, but God willing, Thanksgiving all the way on through the New Year's. And one of the reasons why it came to mind is, as I was getting the lesson together, I told the young people this morning that I had one lesson I wrote. I don't like to write lessons, because if I'm writing them, that means it's coming from the wrong source. One that I think I saw in the passage this week, and then one that I saw this morning, when I saw more and more connections between what Ezekiel is doing right now and where we are in the holiday season. See, because right now, these 10 or 9 chapters or so, they really go from 40 to 48, the very end of the book. He's talking about a new temple, what most people would call, or some people would call, a third temple. And in that third temple, what's going on is he is moving past the time that they haven't even fully seen yet, because there's still this dispute in Israel as to whether or not the rest of the nation is going into captivity. God has moved past the point where he's saying, yes, unfortunately, everybody else is going to go. Now he's going to talk about what it's like when you get back, when it's rebuilt. What's life going to look like? And here's the thing. We've talked about in times past, when life goes a little bit south, we'll call it, of where we want to, sometimes it's difficult to see past the moment. But what he is showing them is a temple that is even more glorious than where they were before. And so when our brother is talking about that whole concept of a God of grace, giving us an example of how to show grace, sometimes grace is helping people to understand, as we often hear, it's not according to what I've done. Because there are times when God will simply reward me for getting back up and trying to overcome whatever it is I've gotten into. And so there are times, likewise, when you gather during the holiday seasons, you're going to be tempted to remember some things. Unless your holidays are nothing like, well, y'all's are all perfect. Okay, I'm used to holiday season where you can't guarantee what's going to come across during it's a long time, right? It's a lot of different people. You don't know who's going to say what. You don't know what's still going to be remembered from holiday season past, that they're going to be reopened afresh once you get the gathering going, right? And all you can control is you. One of the passages we might end up getting to is one of those Romans passages that talks about, as much as it depends upon you, live at peace with all people. And so a lot of your joy during the holiday season is going to depend upon you. Not being able to control the environment, but being able to control your response to it. And one of the graces we see here in Ezekiel 40 through 48 is God giving them more than they deserved, because he already gave them something great. Remember, the first temple came during a time when they were the greatest nation on earth. They ruined that opportunity. But he's saying, I'm not just going to give you something that was less than what you had before. If you get it right, we're all still going to march on that path I had in the first place, which is to give you something better than what you had originally. And so understand, with all of us, whatever we have now, no matter how nice it is, God has something more envisioned for each and every one of us. And when we stumble, that plan doesn't fail. Part of the grace is the fact that he is stable even in times when we can't rely on the stability of our environment. And so our errors don't ruin the plan. The question is, do we simply get back on track with the great things that we haven't even seen yet that he has planned for us? With that, enough preamble. What we're going to see in roughly verses 40 through 42 is a description of the temple proper, the place where I said this week I stumbled. And I spent most of the short lesson this week making corrections, because I said the prince, that's got to be for Jesus, right? I didn't state it that profoundly. I left myself a little room for an out because I needed it. It's clearly not going to be Jesus. This is not the final temple that we will see in the Revelation, because he's talking about a line of princes. And so after Wednesday, when I made that mistake, I spent the rest of the lessons walking it back. One of the first things when you're talking at any point in time, but especially during the holiday season, leave yourself an out. Talk about the basics, right? Between fact and opinion. It's not just for school. They teach us because at times like this, stating your opinions as opinions, give you room to walk them back when you need to. God willing, right? And so ultimately, that's what I had to spend a lot of time doing. Understand, when are some of the times it's going to be most necessary for you to remember? I may need to leave myself out. It's when you are, like this week, I had more going on than usual. Things that have nothing to do with church were competing with my time in a more complicated set of scriptures. This is basically architecture. I don't know anything about architecture, right? But he's trying to communicate it. Usually get the benefit of at least a picture. So I had to go look up some pictures because out of all the stories of the Bible I've been through a whole lot, this wasn't one of them. And so it was right for me to make a mistake, and sure enough, there it was, right? And so leave yourself a qualification. I'm not familiar with this, God willing. And like I told, I think, some folks this week, that I'm comfortable just giving you my opinion because it's just my opinion. I can, God willing, when you give me more information, we can go from there. But beyond that, why does that matter for the holidays? Well, understanding that once he gets past the diagram of what the temple is going to look like, he's going to talk about what life is going to be there because the building means nothing without the relationships within the building. And so he's going to talk about just as God presented himself as leaving the temple when Ezekiel started, as we mentioned before. This is the place where he's literally in chapter 43 going to say, I'll be back. He is going to come back into the place that seemed like it was going to be forsaken. And so there are times in life where I was reminded this week in the holiday season, some people I got a chance to spend some time around last year, just by nature of being by them over at WSU. When I left, I think sometimes you think you leave a place, it's just going to stay completely the same. There's some people who've taken new jobs since I left. There's some people who graduated. Some people I went back and I was like, I'll get to see that. No, Marcus, they're in wherever now. And it's good when you see the people who you've appreciated spending time with, you get to see them fall forward sometimes. They're doing some cool things. And like we said last week, it's cool when you can genuinely be happy for people. Because as they progress, now my holiday season, even though I'm missing them, I get to be happy about some of the things that they've been doing or they're doing in the meantime since we got a chance to speak next. And so as he re-enters the temple, as much as happened in the past, it's a happy reunion. And so God is talking about times, no matter how much worse it's going to get, you're going to have another round of deportations. Understand, I'm coming back. And all of the things I'm telling you next, by the time we get to chapter 46, it reminds us of his rules. His rules are never the point, but they are designed because a lot of what he's going to talk about in the structure of the temple is rest. It's the Sabbaths. When the prince is allowed to enter into the east gate, we talked a little bit about it in the young adults class. When I go to a job, we talked about one of our young people who's having to work a little bit more during the holiday season than otherwise would have liked to. A couple, actually. I told them about times when I had a similar experience coming back from the mission field. When you go to a job, most of the rules you get are about the job. This is flipped here. Most of the rules you're getting here in chapter 46 are about your days off, your rest, how to have a good time. And ultimately, I get that lost in all these rules, that the rules are simply there to make sure that we all have a better rest during the time he's given us together. And so understanding that, that's really the context for what we'll see if you'll turn back with me to chapter 44. And so he's going to talk in particular about one group of individuals who had kind of an unsung role throughout Israel's history, but their consistency ended up making this their moment. When I didn't really know a whole lot about them before I got to this chapter, even though I'd heard their name before. Beginning around verse 15 of chapter 44. It's going to say, but the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, who kept the charge of my sanctuary when the people of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer the fat and the blood, declares the Lord God. First place to pause is probably right there. Because typically, sometimes I debate as to whether or not it's good to read the whole passage and go back, but I'm at an age where if I do that, I'm typically going to forget some things, and I really don't want to lose this point. Understand, we have talked before about sports. I'm not all that familiar with baseball, but I know Brother Barry loves baseball. And there are some people who made their name in the game, kind of like where I'm from. Jose Altuve. He was known as a power hitter, but he leads off because fundamentally, whether he's hitting home runs or not, he's simply able to consistently get on base. In a sport I do know a little bit better, had a man by the name of, they call him Big Shot Bob. And this time last year, I was preaching about Big Shot Bob. His His name is Big Shot Robert Horry, because he won a couple of championships with the Houston Rockets as a role player. Meaning he wasn't Akeem Olajuwon, the big center who won some MVP trophies. He wasn't the famous point guards who were walking the ball up the court and like Steph Curry hitting the big threes to clinch games and set records in the NBA. He, every now and again, would hit one of those big shots. But see, after the Rockets ran through their time, they haven't won a championship since about 1996, there's some other teams that came calling. And so they saw the simplicity of what Bob Horry did, and the San Antonio Spurs, who were going to win a few more championships, they gave Bob a call, and they were like, Bob, would you like to come play, and this is, of course, my version, for San Antonio, not knowing that he'd win at least one more championship there. And then there's probably a more famous franchise you remember, the Los Angeles Lakers, with a teammate who was notoriously tough to play with, Kobe Bryant, who for whatever reason saw something in the simplicity of what Big Shot Bob did and said, Bob, this is your time. And he won a few more championships with the Lakers. And by the time it was all done, I think we mentioned it before, Michael Jordan won. Who remembers how many championships Michael Jordan won? 6, right? How many did Big Shot Bob win? 7, right? So Big Shot Bob was this role player. Never anybody, he would even say it for himself, if you were playing me one-on-one, he's like, I'm not sure there's a guy on any of my teams I could beat one-on-one. However, how did he end up with more championships than Michael Jordan or any of the named talents on the teams he played with? Well, people saw something in his consistency. So understand, we've talked about those times in the Bible where it talks about worst to first. Those who are least among you will be first, and vice versa. But there are some times when you don't necessarily have a worst role. You're just kind of there. And we talked about that whole concept of God. One of the things we don't want to do is put God in a supporting role in our story. But there are times in life when we're going to have to, if we're going to be effective, learn to play a supporting role in someone else's story. And what happened was, even though the throne of David was going to go through some ups and downs, because it was going to go up from David to Solomon was going to do some things that caused it to split and divide, and it was never going to be completely the same from there. There were these priests, the sons of Zadok. If you go back and look at chapter 40, the history, I showed some history links as they appear. You can just do your own search, Zadok, in the Bible, and see how they were just a consistent presence of loyalty to not only the throne, but the things that God was asking them to do. In the days when David was being tossed out, chased by Absalom, they stayed loyal to David. David didn't ask him to go anywhere. They chased him with the ark to take it with them. He said, go back. You've got too many things to do. This is a mess I made. You can probably help me more back there than... And so even then, even there were a number of people who were still loyal to David then, who fell away from Solomon when there was a split between who was going to be the next king after David. The sons of Zadok were still there, wondering what it is that God wanted them to do. And when they found out that God had actually anointed Solomon, it was pretty much a done deal for them. They were just consistent. They were there again. And so now we're seeing, even amongst the sons or the sons of Levi, they weren't the ones originally called to be the priests. But they're replacing those who in times of difficulty and persecution decided to simply compromise the message and say something else. And he's identifying them as the ones who in this portion of time, when God is the one who is now calling for who is going to get to minister to him directly and who is not, the sons of Zadok are going to come up in chapter 40, here in chapter 44, and the very last chapter of the book, chapter 48, as those that God wants to come near to him, to minister to him. And understand, it's not just a preference thing or a favorites thing. I wasn't here when we went through Psalm 45, but if you go back to Psalm 45, it's not going to necessarily jump off of the page, but it's something that seems like it's described as the kind of the marriage supper of the Lamb, something we see in the Revelation. There's going to be a corollary in Psalm 45 when somebody who seems like he's being described as the Christ, it doesn't really fit, because this guy is being described as the most handsome among all men. But then you understand, if you look at the different viewpoints that we get of the Christ, he did not simply come as the Isaiah 52 Christ in the physical flesh. No one that we would be tempted to look at and it's like, oh, this guy's amazing. No, but by the time his own disciples or apostles are looking at him in his fully, we'll call it divine form in the Revelation, they're falling on their faces as though they're dead. And so there's something about him that even his closest friends didn't know when they really saw who he was. That's the Psalm 45 picture that we may see of Jesus when it's describing his marriage supper. And what it's doing toward the end of the chapter is it's talking about the way in which his bride is also decked out for eternity. And then I started to realize that, wait a minute, if we're described as the bride of Christ, one of the things that helps make people want to draw nearer or more close to you, whether it's the holiday season or any time, is how well we talk about it all the time. How much are we sharing a common vision for what we're going to do going forward? Why? Because I know the most difficult times in my life are when, like it says, do not be unequally yoked together. You can fill in the blank. But it specifically says with unbelievers. Why? Because if I am specifically unequally yoked, then we're going to constantly, in times when we could simply be moving forward effectively, one of the things, it's a term we use. I'm starting to overuse it. I don't want to use it too much, but it's still a thing. You don't want to constantly have a clear vision for where you're having to go, being gaslit by somebody is that really? Are you sure? Are you just sowing doubt with 20 or 30 different questions, right? You don't want to be in partnership in a situation where there's always some kind of uncertainty when there simply could be clarity. And Psalm 45 helped me realize forever is an awful long time. And so when God is picking the sons of Zadok, he is not necessarily getting rid of the priesthood, but he's simply saying, these are the people I don't have to argue with regarding which direction we're headed moving forward when I give you nice stuff moving forward. I don't have to always get second-guessed every time I'm issuing a command through whoever the prince is, because the sons of Zadok are right there trying to anticipate the direction we're going. I don't even have to say it. See, we love the passages that talk about from the Bible that are telling us before we even open our mouths, he is answering us, because we talked about it last week. We don't always know what to say, but the Spirit intercedes for us with sounds that words can't communicate. Do you not think he wants us, God willing, at our best, to make the kind of relationship, our relationship with him, like that for him too? He doesn't always have to spell it out, but he understands that as far as we see where he's headed, we're already walking in that direction. And so when we see the sons of Zadok, they're not just the big shot Bobs. It's like we talked about it, did a lesson called Slash, because there's a young man by the name of Cordell Stewart, got to play football a few years ago. He was drafted as a quarterback. I think he won a Heisman Trophy as a quarterback in college, but you know that doesn't always mean you get to play quarterback. So he went to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and there was not an opening at quarterback for him. He's like, fine, I'll play wide receiver for a while. And he not only played wide receiver, he's like, I'll line up at running back if you need me to. And eventually, he got to the point where he's like, you know what? You got a pretty good punter, but I think I can do that too. And so this guy, who was eventually going to be a candidate for the league's most valuable player at quarterback, spent his early years in the league doing everything but what he wanted to do. Come on. One of the people who came to mind for me this week carved out a space for an old man on a basketball court full of young people. Because he's like, oh, old man, okay, old man was me. And he would always be like, first of all, he was extremely talented. And so he was like, I'm telling way too many sports stories today. There's a basketball player by the name of Jimmy Butler, plays for the Miami Heat right now. He made a stop in Minnesota before Anthony Edwards was the big noise in Minnesota. And he had this famous NBA lore where he got so mad in practice one day, he called up the worst guys on the end of Minnesota's bench. And he's like, I'm going to beat all the starters with all y'all. And did. And so that was the famous story of how Anthony Edwards used his talent to take some of the leftover talent on Minnesota's bench and remind the starters that they weren't playing hard enough. And so understand, when I found somebody who had that kind of, at least that portion of Jimmy Butler's mentality, he's like, oh man, come on, you can play me whenever. And so he would give me an opportunity to step up and not feel like I was just kind of there, but he used his clout. He had a lot of clout over on that campus to make me feel like I had a place, even if I wasn't the most talented person out on the court that day. And then the question is, in your life and in the holiday seasons, how are you using your clout? How are you using your platform, as we would call it? How are you using your influence? Because, see, as I was going back in my mind of people I'm missing right now, that was one of the first names that came to mind, because he used all of his talent and all of his influence to not just make me feel at home, but likewise, at the end of the year, WSU, some of the players, some of these guys are going to the league. Namely, one's coming to mind. He's still in college, but he's probably going to the league. Those guys would come run with us after the season was over, during the time of the transfer portal. And they didn't treat us like we were less than. They treated us like we were people. Not like you still run that court, we're going to have the big boys court over here. No, we ran with them. I remember one time when the old man got to run with this big dude. He might not have been 7 feet, but he was close enough to it. He could have swatted everything the old man thought he was going to shoot that day. But he once again, like the man who led him, treated everybody on that court with respect. And so as you were looking at the big shot Bobs, sometimes it's a question of what are you willing to do? Because it's one thing for him to give me an opportunity to run with him, but my eyes were focused on when I got a chance to play with somebody who was that talented, who had that much clout, who could have done anything he wanted with his platform. My attitude was, what do you need me to do? I didn't need to take 20 shots. I didn't need to take one shot. I was just happy to be on the team and run some defense. You need some rebounds? What do you need? Because I was just happy that I had the opportunity. And so in life, understand the sons of Zadok. They are some of those supporting characters. That's not the kind of thing you can turn on and off in life when the opportunity comes. You can do that, but people are going to know whether you are in the habit of giving all of your best effort in this way, or whether you are have developed at least some skills or talents in being a role player, whether or not you're trying, but it's not really what you do. And so understand the sons of Zadok were developed over generations and over an entire lifetime of warming up to the role of being able to do whatever it was that was necessary. And understand, you will be shocked in life after just hitting a bunch of singles, the number of times opportunities might come calling to you because somebody needs not necessarily another superstar who can't defend. They just need somebody who can fill whatever role is necessary. So understand, it's great seeing about the sons of Zadok in chapters like this when they're exalted. But before they're exalted, they have to get into the habit of, really, it's beyond the work ethic. How popular do you think the sons of Zadok were, as we talked about before, in times when everybody else was picking up an alternate version of whatever temple worship should have been? As we talked about on the walls of the old temple that God destroyed, there were these symbols and images on the wall that if you really trace back their origin, they really were demonic symbols, literally in the house of God. How popular do you think the killjoys were in a time when people were literally writing demonic things or reconciling God with demonic things, right? And so ultimately, it's not just the willingness to do the job. It's the willingness to, I heard somebody talking just this morning, I think it was, I clicked on a link. They talked about not so much, and I mentioned it before, that whole concept of quiet quitting, but it's understanding how to go to a job where you're dealing with all kinds of things. They're getting in the way of you getting done what you need to get done. And that's who the sons of Zadok to me were. Because we don't hear a lot about their persecution. But I'm guessing if Jeremiah had to deal with it, the other killjoys were dealing with it in another version of that as well, right? And here's the thing. The holiday season, I said I was going to sit. I told them I was going to sit on the seat so I didn't get too preachy, and I didn't. Now I'm standing up now, just as preachy as normal. But ultimately, it's not about just being one of the good kids. It's about understanding the opportunity that God has waiting for you if you can endure the supporting role that doesn't get all the glory. Sometimes in life, you're going to do some things where other people are going to get the credit for it. That's not fun at all. But that's also part of it. Because ultimately, these are all temptations to lead you off of the road that leads you to something, as we mentioned, that is more amazing than you can ever imagine that God has for you. If you can deal with not getting the proper credit, being in a role that's less than what your abilities are. And then with that, dealing with all the drama that goes with taking that supporting role. See, because one of the advantages for me of sometimes of sliding into a supporting role is, if I'm sitting here and all the drama's out there, that's perfect. But what's it like when you're sitting in the quiet place and the drama comes to find you? All of these things, as we see, they're temptations. But more than temptations to sin, as our brother read during the communion talk, they're temptations for you to give up on things that are basically just better days ahead. Better days ahead. That's enough. That's enough of me being preachy. As I'm going to keep reading and still be preachy. But let's try to give me a chance not to be quite as preachy as we continue on. Verse 16. They shall enter my sanctuary, and they shall approach my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge. When they enter the gates of the inner court, they shall wear linen garments. They shall have nothing of wool on them while they minister at the gates of the inner court within. They shall have linen turbans on their head and linen undergarments around their waist. They shall not bind themselves with anything that causes sweat. And when they go out to the outer court to the people, they shall put off the outer garments in which they have been ministering and lay them in the holy chamber. And they shall put on the outer garments, lest they transmit holiness to the people with their garments. Verse 20, they shall not shave their beards and let their locks grow long. They shall surely trim the hair of their heads. Verse 21, no priest shall drink wine when he enters the inner court. They shall not marry a widow or a divorced woman, but only virgins of the offspring of the house of Israel, or a widow who is the widow of the priest. Verse 23, they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the clean and the unclean. In a dispute they shall act as judges, and they shall judge according to my judgments. They shall keep my laws and my statutes and all my appointed feasts, and they shall keep my Sabbaths holy. Two things I would like to emphasize. Verse 23, they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the common. It's a lot of rules. That's the part that can often cause us as we read all those rules that lead up to the teach my people the difference between the common and uncommon. If you're like me, it causes me to potentially want to check out. Understand, there are times when it's good to know. It's just FYI information, but don't lose the point. When he's talking about the distinction between the holy and the unholy, sometimes understand that in this season of life, as you are coming together, one of the things that will help you as you gather around the tables with different types of people, or even if you go to a gathering where you have the perfect opportunity for peace and no conflict with anybody at the table, if it was anything like me going to the grocery store starting to get a jump start on the shopping, you can see all your usual suspects, the people who are used to creating a happy environment, creating the kind of place that you just want to go back to. It's not just shopping. It's fun to go. I want to see such and such. I want to see so-and-so. But now it's the holidays, and like we said, not everybody is familiar with the culture of the place, even when the culture is good. And so there are going to be some places where you're going to go, where, as we mentioned, how do we get to the point where no matter what I'm hearing, my response is one that's healthy? And one of the first things to understand is, as we mentioned before, when he is teaching them the distinction between clean and unclean, that goes back to what I mentioned before. Sometimes if you can understand the difference between, like you say, picking your battles, the things that I say that have a lot to do with the next verse, when it talks about the judgments that they use will be the judgments of God. No matter how close these men have drawn to God, the only things that they are really talking about are, thus says the Lord. And so, as we mentioned before, kind of re-preaching, finally stumbling upon the passage that goes to what I introduced earlier. Understand that in situations where, like we said, the times are good, the situation is good, the conversation is great, that's awesome. But understand as well, your contribution to the situation has everything to do with two things. One, as we've already mentioned, distinguishing the things that are my opinion. If you're in an environment where you can share your opinion and it's going to contribute to the environment, like I used to say with one of my buddies, they realized that we were going to get an opportunity. We were both going through some stressful times. Their parents had a timeshare somewhere, and they said, why don't you guys just go take a break and just relax your minds, and God willing, come back in the situation, even if it hasn't changed, your perspectives on it will be better. But the danger is some of our friends at that particular congregation know that when you get the best of friends in a traveling environment, sometimes it puts unusual stress on the relationship. And I was from Texas, or I'm from Texas, where we're a little bit more blunt about the things we say and how we communicate. My friend was a little bit more soft-spoken. And one of the things we got to work through in our friendship or our relationship at that point was, like I've already mentioned, sometimes I'm blunt. But just because I'm blunt doesn't mean I'm right. And so there are times when the conversation may turn a certain way. As long as you can make room for the blunt people in your life to state their opinion. And God willing, if you're one of those blunt people, if you can simply not take your opinion so seriously that you think it's the gospel truth, then no matter what bumpy roads the conversations might go down, just leave room for healing. Just leave room for healing. And so one of the things that made the sons of Zadok, those who were equipped in this situation to deal with both God and the people, is I think they were those who were conditioned not to overlook the significance of this passage. When they were rendering judgments for God, that's a pretty high position. But insofar as they had that high position, they didn't, I'm guessing, take on the position of judges without the humility that said, all I can give you at my best is a clear understanding of this, or thus says the Lord. And beyond that, it's my opinion. And we can disagree on my opinion. But God willing, we can still, as I've seen in ministry, one of the things that allows us to heal and come together, whether it's in classes or in just family settings, is the degree to which people actually respect what the Lord is saying. And so there are times when I lost hope in being able to mend relationships. But I was shocked at the times when I let go of trying to more articulately state my opinion, and I simply told someone something from what the Word said, that their opinion completely changed, more than I could persuade them with any of my words. And so understand, as we're going into the holiday season, the second thing that I promised to mention may be even more important than that. Because ultimately what's going on is beyond the diplomacy, beyond simply understanding that we can find some things to agree on, as I have to do from time to time, I have to take a step back from the sermon and just talk about the people. The situation that this most reminded me of was a situation where, like with that young man I mentioned before, who's moved on to greener pastures, bringing all kinds of pseudo-celebrities around the common folk. One of the things that I most appreciated was the fact that whenever he showed up, whether he had famous people with him or not, he was, as the title says, the reason why it simply was a better place to be. And so as we look at this period of Israel's history in the sons of Zadok, there are two ways in which we can be the reason why people enjoy either being in a place where we are gathered together over the holidays, or willing and eager to come back or extend another invitation. And it has to do with, as we've already mentioned, that portion of being the kind of presence, as we just turn to chapter 47, maybe hopefully it'll become more clear there, or at least I can get it back more clearly in my mind as I'm stammering and stumbling through the lesson now. If you turn to chapter 47 with me, understand that one of the things that's flowing from the temple is just some water. It's not even described as a river, but as it flows from the temple, it's going to get deeper and deeper. Understanding that in chapter 47, verses 3 and following, it's going to say, going on eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man who was guiding Ezekiel through this view of the temple measured 1,000 cubits and led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. And he measured 1,000 cubits and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. And again he measured 1,000 cubits and led me through the water, and it was waist deep. And again he measured 1,000 cubits, and it was a river that I could not pass through, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in. But the thing that really caught my attention starts in verse 7. As I went back, I saw on the banks of the river very many trees on one side and on the other. And he said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region, and it goes into the Arabah and enters the sea. When the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. And whoever goes, as we saw in our scripture reading for this morning, and wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live. And there will be very many fish, for this water goes there, and for this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea from the En-Gedi to En-Galim. It will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be fish of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and its marshes will not become fresh. They are to be left for salt. And on the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail. But they will be fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be food. Let me just pause and slow down, and we'll get through this. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves will be for healing. Sometimes when your voice is cracking, the words aren't coming together right, just go back to the Word. That's what I'm going to try to do now. And just let you know that this is a tree or a river that looks a whole lot like the river of life that is flowing from the temple that we see at the end of the Revelation. And so one of the things is that's hotly disputed about this particular temple is, was it ever built? And is this going to be the millennial temple where God will once again dwell with people, likely in the form of Jesus, where Christ will reign for 1,000 years? We don't know. But we do know that life presents us with some opportunities that just pass us by. And if you're anything like me, there's some times when I would have some hopes on some things in life that were just going to happen by now, and they just didn't. And so ultimately the question is, am I going to cling to that vision of what had been, but just really seems like it might never be? Or am I going to be able to move forward to something else that God has for me? Understand that the reason why that young man represented so much hope for me is because much like this river, I might not get everything I want out of life, but he was one of those people that ended up providing sustenance to the little fish that he would find along the way. And so likewise, as you were going into the holiday season, if I hadn't said that 20 times already, you have the opportunity to be a refreshing presence to somebody at a gathering. No matter how well the conversation is going or how foul it's going. One of the things I have seen is some of the side conversations are sometimes some of the best. The private moments you get with people you either don't necessarily know all that well, or the chance you get to reconnect with folks you've seen but haven't necessarily had the chance to keep up with over the years as you might have hoped. The stream that we see flowing from the temple at this point is something that provides refreshment to everything it comes in contact with. And we've talked about it before. For me, I never understood or appreciated as much the value of the encouragement ministry as I did when I became a preacher. So there are times in life where the encouragement ministry might seem like the sons of Zadok. Might not seem like it's all that important to say nice things to people. It might not seem like it's all that important to be able to lift a spirit with just a word. But that's one of those things that it says in Psalm 45. One of the things that distinguishes, if it is the Christ from everyone else, is he is not only more radiant in his appearance than what they were used to seeing him as that humble servant who didn't have a place to lay his head. As he said, the foxes have holes, the birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Because he's been in those places, he was uniquely gifted in being able to encourage people at every stage in life. And that's one of the commonly overlooked characteristics of Christ. We see his miracles, we see his great sermons, we see all the wondrous works that he did, and those are the first things that we think about. But every now and again, we think maybe that the woman at the well was the only person he was able to encourage. When it says at the end of the book of John, if everything that he was able to do that was noteworthy was written, the libraries on, I don't know, I'm stretching the truth now, all the libraries in the world, I'm going to exaggerate it, you look it up, would not be able to contain all the valuable things that he did. And so one of the more overlooked things that he did that I think is super valuable at this time is understanding, as we said before, the reason that we come together, God willing, by the time we get to Christmas, is to remember the Christ, but hopefully it's to remember some of the lesser known parts of his character, the ones that it's easy for us to emulate. See, I can't necessarily move mountains, as we've talked about before, with great faith. I might not be able to do a lot of the great things that the kings of Israel were able to do. But encouragement is one of those consistent things that I can get better at. And the more I learn about people and the things that they're going through, and I can match that with the sufferings that I've had, the more I can keep hitting singles at just being a presence, God willing, that's encouraging to people. And so then when we talk about that whole concept of the reason, ultimately the reason that we get together for this season might be to eat, might be to find friends, but it might be to encourage somebody who has nobody, as we say from time to time, or to find that person in the room who might be like the sons of Zadok. They might be really overworked during this time of year. They might, as we look at them, it might seem like everything's just fine. They're not down here, they're not up here. They're just a person who's constantly hitting singles, who's under a lot of stress. God willing, we will be able to understand that part of being able to say the right thing is to be able to listen and look for people who need a word of encouragement this time of year. And God willing, beyond simply offering the words of encouragement, as you get examples from real life stumbling and stammering right in front of you, there are times in life where you get the opportunity to see people stumble and stammer. You get the chance to be reminded that God willing, it's not about them, but God willing, if you will simply stay consistent. Get back to the word. This is a preacher hack. It's one of the things I've learned to do over the years. When things aren't going so well, I just get back to the word and start reading all over again. I'm like, oh, there it is. And sometimes he's able to set me on the right path. And so likewise, as you're going into your holiday season, sometimes not knowing what to say is the best place to be. Because sometimes all people need is a listening ear. And God willing, we will be whatever people need us to be in God during this holiday season as we together stand and sing.